The baby's cry cut through the auction crowd like a blade through leather. Maria Esperanza clutched her daughter closer, the child's pale hair catching sunlight like spun silver against her own dark skin. Around them, men spat tobacco juice and muttered about curses, their eyes sliding away from little Luz as if her difference might somehow infect them. $10! Her grandmother's voice cracked like a whip behind her. $10 for the pair of them, and good riddance. Maria's throat closed. She'd known this moment would come, had felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon ever since Luz was born 6 months ago, with skin white as bone and eyes the color of winter sky. Her own mother had crossed herself and whispered prayers, but her grandmother, Esperanza's iron-willed matriarch, had seen only shame. The auctioneer, a reed-thin man with nervous hands, cleared his throat. "Well, now, folks, we have here a young woman and her unusual child. Strong back on the woman, good for cooking and cleaning. The baby," he faltered, glancing at Luz's ethereal features, "the baby comes with." Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and sharp. Maria felt each chuckle like a physical blow. She pressed her lips to Luz's downy head, breathing in that sweet baby scent that always calmed her racing heart. Her daughter was perfect, every tiny finger, every gentle sigh, every moment when those strange pale eyes focused on Maria's face with pure love. But to these people, to her own family, Luz was a mark of sin, a reminder of Maria's fall from grace. A year ago, she'd been different. Esperanza Reyes, the blacksmith's daughter, promised to Diego Martinez before her 16th birthday. Respectable, protected. Then came that night when Diego had too much whiskey and too little patience. And 9 months later, Luz arrived with features that matched neither parent. Diego had taken one look and declared the child cursed, a punishment for Maria's supposed infidelity. Never mind that Maria had never lain with another man, never even kissed another's lips. The truth mattered less than appearances, and Luz's appearance told a story no one wanted to believe. $5, called a voice from the back. Maria's stomach lurched. Now, the auctioneer said, his confidence returning. "Surely we can do better than that. Look at those arms. She could work a field from dawn to dusk. And the baby might yet prove useful when it's older." Maria closed her eyes against the tears threatening to fall. This was her punishment, not for sin, but for loving too deeply, trusting too completely. She thought Diego would stand by her when Luz was born different. Instead, he joined the chorus calling her child a curse, an abomination. Even the priest had suggested the baby bore the mark of some ancient evil, although his eyes had been kind when he'd whispered it. $7, came another bid, accompanied by coarse laughter about what the woman might be good for. The words hit Maria like fists. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin with what remained of her pride. If she was to be sold like livestock, she would not cower. Luz deserved better than a mother who broke beneath shame. Through the crowd, she glimpsed her grandmother's weathered face, set like stone. Esperanza Morales had raised 5 children through drought and war, buried 2 husbands and 3 babies. She was a woman who did what survival demanded, nothing more. Love was a luxury their family could no longer afford. $8. The voice carried excitement now, as if bidding on a particularly promising mare. Maria's arms tightened around Luz, who had quieted to soft whimpers. The baby's tiny fist curled around Maria's finger with surprising strength, as if she sensed the danger surrounding them. Those pale eyes, so startling in a face that might have been carved from moonlight, gazed up with perfect trust. "She trusts me," Maria thought desperately. She trusts me to keep her safe, and I'm failing her before she can even walk."
The crowd stirred as someone moved through the pressed bodies, but Maria kept her gaze fixed on Luz's face. She couldn't bear to see the faces of those who would buy her, use her, discard her when her usefulness ended. Better to memorize every detail of her daughter's features while she still could. "$9, called the auctioneer, his voice rising with showmanship. $9 for a woman in her prime and a child who might bring luck to the right household. Luck, as if Luz were a rabbit's foot or a found penny, not a living child with her own soul, her own right to love and protection. Maria's jaw clenched. Whatever happened next, whoever bought them, she would find a way to give Luz the life she deserved, even if it killed her. The sun beat down mercilessly on the auction platform, and sweat beaded on Maria's forehead despite the autumn chill. Around them the crowd grew restless, eager to move on to the next lot. Probably horses or cattle, creatures deemed more valuable than a fallen woman and her strange child. "Going once for $9, the auctioneer announced. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. $9, less than the cost of a decent horse, barely enough to buy winter supplies. This was her worth, her baby's worth, in the eyes of her own people. $10, came a new voice from the edge of the crowd. The auctioneer paused, scanning the faces. "Ah, we have 10. Any advance on 10? Maria forced herself to look toward the voice, though every instinct screamed against it. Her breath caught. There, standing apart from the crowd like a mountain rising from plains, was a man unlike any she'd seen. Tall and broad-shouldered, with long black hair and copper skin, he watched the proceedings with dark eyes that seemed to see everything and judge nothing. Apache, she realized, with a mixture of fear and strange curiosity. What was an Apache chief doing at a Mexican settlement's auction? His gaze found hers across the crowd, and something passed between them. Not pity, not hunger, but recognition, as if he saw something in her and Luz that the others had missed entirely. $20, he said quietly, but his voice carried clearly through the sudden hush. 30, he added before anyone could respond, stepping forward through the parting crowd like water flowing around stone. The crowd's murmur died into stunned silence as the Apache chief approached the platform. Maria found herself frozen, clutching Luz against her chest as this stranger's dark eyes studied them both with an intensity that made her skin prickle. His presence transformed the entire auction. What had been a crude marketplace transaction suddenly felt weighted with significance she couldn't name. $30, the auctioneer repeated, his voice cracking slightly. That's quite generous, sir." The chief's expression didn't change, but Maria caught something flickering in his eyes as he looked at Luz. Not the revulsion or superstitious fear she'd grown accustomed to, but something that made her breath catch. Wonder, perhaps, or recognition of something precious that others had dismissed as worthless. "The child," he said, his English heavily accented but clear. "She is not cursed." A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the crowd. "Tell that to a father. Poor Diego Martinez couldn't get away fast enough when he saw what came out." Maria's cheeks burned, but the Apache chief turned toward the voice with such calm authority that the laughter died immediately. When he spoke, his words were measured, deliberate. "Your Diego Martinez is a fool who cannot recognize a gift from the spirits." The silence that followed was absolute. Maria stared at this stranger who had just defended her daughter to a crowd of hostile faces, defended her with a certainty that Maria herself had lost months ago. Luz stirred in her arms, making soft cooing sounds, and those winter-pale eyes seemed drawn to the chief's weathered features. "35," came a nervous bid from somewhere in the crowd, but it sounded half-hearted, as if the bidder already knew he wouldn't prevail against this imposing figure. The chief didn't even glance toward the new bidder. Instead, he reached into a leather pouch at his belt and withdrew a handful of silver coins, letting them catch the light as he counted them deliberately. $50, he said, placing the coins on the auction block one by one. Each metallic clink seemed to echo in the stillness. $50, going once. His voice trailed off, as no one dared challenge the bid. Going twice. Sold to... He paused, clearly unsure how to address this unexpected buyer. Naalnish, the chief supplied, of the Chiricahua. As the auctioneer completed the transaction with shaking hands, Maria felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Everything she'd expected about this day, the humiliation, the separation from Luz, the beginning of a life of servitude, had crumbled in the space of minutes. This man, this Apache chief named Naalnish, had just purchased her and her daughter for more money than most of these people saw in a year. But why? She studied his face as he approached the platform, searching for clues to his intentions. His features were strong, weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent watching horizons. There was something in his bearing that reminded her of her grandfather, a quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself, a confidence earned through trials she could only imagine. When he reached the platform's edge, he extended a hand to help her down. The gesture was courteous, respectful, nothing like the crude grabbing she'd expected from whoever bought her. His fingers were calloused, warm, steady as they closed around hers. "Come," he said simply. "We will go now." Maria hesitated, glancing back at the crowd where her grandmother stood. The old woman's face remained stone-hard, showing no regret for what she'd just done. There would be no tearful farewell, no blessing for the journey ahead. In her grandmother's eyes, Maria had already ceased to exist the moment she bore a child who brought shame rather than pride. Luz made a soft sound, and Maria looked down to find her daughter gazing up at Naalnish with those unsettling pale eyes. To her amazement, the baby's expression held no fear. Instead, Luz reached one tiny hand toward the chief's weathered faces, fingers grasping at air as if trying to touch something she recognized. Naalnish went very still. Then, with movements so gentle they seemed at odds with his imposing frame, he extended one finger toward the baby's reaching hand. When the baby's miniature fingers wrapped around his withered digit, his breath caught audibly. "Is done Naalnish," he murmured in his own language, his voice filled with something approaching reverence. "What does that mean?" Maria asked him, surprised by her own boldness in questioning him. His dark eyes met hers, and for the first time since he'd appeared, she saw his carefully controlled expression soften slightly. "White woman," he said, "but also spirit-touched, sacred."
The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Sacred. After months of hearing her daughter called cursed, abomination, devil-marked, this stranger saw something holy in Luz's difference. Tears she'd been fighting all day finally spilled over, running down her cheeks in tracks that caught the dust and grime of the auction yard. "You're wrong," she whispered. "Everyone says everyone is wrong." His certainty was absolute, unshakable as mountain stone. "She carries the blessing of both worlds, your world and mine. The spirits have marked her for something important." Around them, the crowd was dispersing, the spectacle over. But Maria felt frozen in this moment.
in this conversation that was reshaping everything she thought she knew about her daughter, about her future, about the man who now owned them both. "Why did you buy us?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her throat since his first bid. Naalnish was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Maria and Luz. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, thoughtful. "3 days ago, I dreamed of a woman with hair like night and eyes like storm clouds, holding a child touched by winter spirits. In the dream, the child brought peace between our peoples, ended years of war and mistrust." He paused, studying Maria's face. "Today I saw that woman. Today I saw that child." Maria's legs felt suddenly unsteady. "Dreams can lie." "Apache dreams do not lie, especially not dreams that come 3 times. His expression grew serious. "But I will not force you to believe what you are not ready to understand. For now it is enough that you and the child are safe." Safe. When had she last felt truly safe? Not since Luz was born, certainly. Not since Diego's rejection, her family's shame, the long slide toward this moment on an auction block. "My horse is there," Naalnish said, nodding toward a magnificent paint stallion waiting at the edge of the settlement. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Maria said, though she wondered if she remembered how. It had been over a year since she'd sat a horse, another freedom lost when pregnancy and shame confined her to her grandmother's adobe walls. As they walked toward the horse, Maria became acutely aware of the eyes following them. Some held curiosity, others fear, a few open hostility. An Apache chief walking freely through their settlement with his new purchases was unprecedented, unsettling. She caught fragments of whispered conversations. Never seen one of them pay good money for anything. What's he planning to do with them? Probably sacrifice the cursed baby to their heathen gods. The last comment made Maria's arms tighten protectively around Luz, but Naalnish seemed unaffected by the murmurs. He moved with the calm assurance of a man accustomed to hostile attention, neither hurrying nor slowing his pace. When they reached his horse, he surprised her again by producing a soft woolen blanket from his saddlebags and draping it carefully around Luz. "The journey to my camp is long," he explained. "She should stay warm." The consideration in the gesture caught Maria off guard. This was not the behavior of a man who saw them as property to be used and discarded. But then, what did she know of Apache customs? Perhaps he was merely protecting his investment.
As Naalnish helped her onto the horse behind him, Maria caught a last glimpse of her grandmother's rigid figure in the dispersing crowd. For just a moment, she thought she saw the old woman's composure crack, saw something that might have been regret flicker across her weathered features. But the moment passed, and Esperanza Morales turned away without a word, walking back toward the life that no longer had room for Maria and Luz. The horse moved beneath them with smooth, powerful strides, carrying them away from everything Maria had ever known. As the settlement grew smaller behind them, she found herself studying the man who now controlled her fate. His hair fell in a dark cascade down his back, held with leather ties and small silver ornaments that caught the light. His shoulders were broad beneath a simple cotton shirt, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing as Luz dozed against her chest. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly an hour. "To my people's winter camp, in the mountains beyond the Rio Grande. It is hidden, safe from the soldiers and settlers who would drive us further west." His people. Maria's pulse quickened as the full implications of her situation began to sink in. She was traveling toward an Apache camp, carrying a child that some among his tribe might view with the same suspicion her own people had shown. What if his dream had been wrong? What if they saw Luz not as spirit-touched, but as a threat? "Will they accept us?" she asked, voicing her fears. Naalnish was quiet for so long that Maria wondered if he'd heard her. Finally, he spoke without turning around. "My grandmother is the camp's medicine woman. She has dreamed of you as well, the pale child who would bring change to our people. She waits to meet you both." The words should have been comforting, but Maria found herself thinking of another grandmother, one who had just sold her own blood to strangers. Grandmothers, in her experience, were practical creatures who did what they believed necessary for survival, regardless to the cost to individuals. As if sensing her thoughts, Naalnish continued, "Shijie, my grandmother, she is not like your family. Among the Apache, children are gifts from the spirits, no matter how they appear in the world. We do not cast out our own for being different." The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable. Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks, shame mixing with a strange flutter of hope. Could it be true? Could there really be a place where Luz would be welcomed rather than feared? The landscape around them had changed as they traveled, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills covered in juniper and pinyon pine. The air grew cooler and cleaner, carrying scents of pine sap and distant snow. Luz stirred in her arms, making soft sounds of contentment that seemed to harmonize with the rhythm of the horse's hooves. "She likes the mountains," Naalnish observed, glancing back at them. "How can you tell?" "Listen to her sounds. They are different now, peaceful, like singing." Maria tilted her head, focusing on Luz's soft vocalizations. He is right. The fretful whimpers that had marked their time at the auction had been replaced by something almost melodic, as if the baby was responding to some harmony Maria couldn't hear. "You notice things," she said, surprising herself with the observation. "A chief who does not notice dies young. His people die with him." The simple statement carried weight that made Maria look at him with new eyes. This was not just a man who had bought them on impulse. This was a leader responsible for the survival of his entire tribe. That he had risked $50 on a stranger's dream spoke to either profound faith or dangerous recklessness. "How long have you been chief?" "5 winters, since my father was killed by soldiers who came to our camp under a flag of truce." The bitterness in his voice was carefully controlled, but Maria heard it nonetheless. She thought of her own losses, Diego's abandonment, her family's rejection, and realized they were small things compared to watching your father murdered under a promise of safety. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "War makes orphans of us all, but it also teaches us to recognize what is worth preserving." His gaze found hers again, holding it for a moment that stretched beyond politeness into something deeper. Maria felt her breath catch, unprepared for the intensity of his attention or the way it made something flutter low in her stomach. Then Luz made a sound, not quite a laugh but close to it, and the moment shifted. Both adults looked down at the baby, who was reaching towards something only she could see, her pale eyes bright with fascination. "She sees them," Naalnish said softly. "Sees what?" "The mountain spirits. They are welcoming her home."
The Apache camp materialized from the mountainside like something from a dream. One moment they were riding through what seemed like empty wilderness, and the next, Maria could see dozens of hide shelters nestled among the pine trees, smoke rising from cook fires, children playing in the golden afternoon light. The settlement blended so seamlessly with the landscape that Maria understood why soldiers and settlers rarely found these hidden communities. As they approached, Apache men and women emerged from their daily tasks to watch the newcomers. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs, but the faces surrounding them showed curiosity rather than hostility. Children ran alongside the horse, laughing and calling out in their musical language, their dark eyes bright with excitement. "Naalnish has returned!" called an older woman, her voice carrying clearly through the camp, "and he brings the mother and child from his visions." The words sent a shiver through Maria. His visions, so others knew about his dreams, had been expecting their arrival. She found herself wondering what exactly Naalnish had told his people about the strange white woman and her albino daughter. They stopped before the largest shelter, its entrance decorated with intricate beadwork and painted symbols that seemed to shimmer in the slanting sunlight. An ancient woman emerged, her silver hair braided with feathers and small bones, her weathered face marked by decades of desert sun and mountain wind. This had to be Shijaya, the grandmother who supposedly shared Naalnish's dreams. The old woman's dark eyes went immediately to Luz, and Maria felt her baby grow very still, as if sensing the importance of this moment. For long seconds, grandmother and child regarded each other in absolute silence while the entire camp seemed to hold its breath. Then Shiji smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her ancient features, and spoke rapidly in Apache. Naalnish responded in the same language, his voice carrying tones of respect and affection. Maria caught the cadences of their conversation, but understood nothing, leaving her suspended in anxious uncertainty. Finally, the old woman switched to accented but clear Spanish. "Welcome, daughter. I have been waiting many seasons to meet you both." The kindness in her voice almost undid Maria's careful composure. After months of rejection and scorn, being called daughter by this revered medicine woman felt like absolution she hadn't dared hoped for. "Thank you," Maria managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't understand why you've been waiting for us. We're nothing special." "Ah," the old woman interrupted, raising one gnarled finger. "This is what your people told you, yes? That the child is cursed? That you are both marked by evil spirits?" Maria nodded, not trusting her voice. "Your people see with blind eyes," the old woman said firmly. "Come, bring the little goddess. We have much to discuss." Goddess? The word hit Maria like a physical blow. First Naalnish calling Luz sacred, now his grandmother using a term that seemed almost blasphemous. Yet as they followed Shiji into her shelter, Maria found herself looking at her daughter with new eyes, trying to see what these Apache people saw so clearly. The interior of the shelter was larger than it had appeared from outside, filled with the rich scents of burning sage, leather, and herbs Maria couldn't identify. Elaborately decorated rugs covered the ground, and the walls were hung with weapons, tools, and objects whose purposes she could only guess at. Shiji gestured for them to sit on soft buffalo robes arranged around a small fire. "Give me the child," the old woman said, extending her arms. Every maternal instinct in Maria's body rebelled against the request. Luz was the one thing she had left, the only pure love in her shattered world. But Naalnish's quiet presence beside her and the patience in Shiji's expression gradually calmed her fears. With trembling hands, she passed Luz to the medicine woman. Shiji received the baby with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. She examined Luz's pale features carefully, murmuring what sounded like prayers or blessings in Apache. Luz, remarkably, remained calm throughout the inspection, her winter blue eyes fixed on the old woman's face with an intensity that seemed almost adult. "Yes," Shiji said finally, her voice filled with satisfaction. "She carries the mark of changing woman, the spirit who created the first people of both worlds. See how her skin holds the color of mountain snow? How her eyes reflect the sky in winter? She is a bridge between your people and mine, sent to heal the wounds of generations." Maria's rational mind rejected the mystical explanation, but something deeper responded to the certainty in the old woman's voice. "I don't understand. How can a baby be a bridge between peoples? She's just my daughter." "She is your daughter, yes, but she is also much more." Shiji's ancient eyes found Maria's. "Tell me, child,
When you look at her, what do you see?" "I see," Maria paused, struggling to put her feelings into words. "I see everything beautiful in the world, everything worth protecting. When she looks at me, I feel like I might actually be the person she thinks I am." "And what person is that?" "Strong, brave, good." The words came out barely audibly. "Someone worthy of love." Shijai nodded slowly. "This is her gift, to show people their true selves, but it is also why she frightens those who prefer their ugliness hidden." The observation struck Maria with uncomfortable force. Diego had indeed seemed afraid when he looked at Luz, though Maria had attributed it to superstition. Now she wondered if he'd been afraid of what her innocent gaze revealed about his own character. "My grandson has told you of his dreams, but he has not told you all of them. Would you like to know what else the spirits showed him?" Maria glanced at Naalnish, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. His dark eyes were unreadable, but she sensed tension in the line of his shoulders. Yes," she said, though part of her feared what she might learn. "He saw war ending," Shijai said simply. "Not through victory or defeat, but through understanding. He saw Apache children and Mexican children playing together, learning each other's languages, sharing food and stories. He saw a future where your daughter's children would be called blessed by both peoples, where her mixed blood would be seen as strength rather than shame." The vision was so beautiful, so impossible, that Maria felt tears sting her eyes. "That can't happen," she whispered. "There's too much hatred, too much fear." "Perhaps," the old woman agreed, "but the spirits rarely show us what will be. They show us what could be, if we have courage enough to make the difficult choices." "What choices?" Instead of answering, Shijai looked at Naalnish and spoke rapidly in Apache. He responded with what sounded like protests, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself and fell silent. The old woman's expression was implacable, as she replied in tones that brooked no argument.
Finally, Naalnish turned to Maria, his expression troubled. "My grandmother says the time for gradual change has passed. She believes the spirits are calling for something more dramatic." "What does that mean?" "It means," Shejay said, switching back to Spanish, "that my grandson must take you as his wife." The words hung in the air like smoke from the fire, impossible to ignore or unsee. Maria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she tried to process what the old woman had just suggested. Marriage! To an Apache chief! To this man who had bought her at auction only hours ago. "That's—" she began, then stopped. What was it? Impossible? Necessary? Terrifying? All of those things at once? "I know it is much to consider," Shejay said gently. "You do not know our ways, and Naalnish is still a stranger to you. But the dreams are clear. Your union would bind our peoples together in ways that no treaty or trade agreement ever could. Your children would belong to both worlds, would grow up seeing no enemies, only different kinds of family." Maria looked at Naalnish, trying to read his expression. Did he want this marriage, or was he simply following his grandmother's mystical instructions? His face revealed nothing, but she caught the slight tension in his jaw, the way his hands rested too carefully on his knees. "You don't want this," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "What I want is not important. What matters is what is best for my people." The answer stung more than Maria had expected. Of course he didn't want to marry a fallen Mexican woman with a strange child. He was a chief, a leader of warriors. He could have his pick of Apache women, strong, beautiful women who understood his world and could give him children who belonged fully to his tribe. "I see," she said, her voice carefully neutral. And what about what's best for me? For Luz? The question seems to catch him off guard. His dark eyes searched her face, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "What would be best for you?" he asked. Maria considered the question seriously. What did she want? Safety for Luz, certainly. A place where her daughter could grow up without shame, without fear. But beyond that, the possibility of being valued, of finding purpose beyond mere survival. The chance to be seen as more than a cautionary tale or a burden to be disposed of. And if she was honest with herself, there was something about this quiet, complicated man that called to something deep inside her. The way he'd defended Luz without hesitation, the gentleness in his hands when he'd helped her onto his horse, the strength that didn't need to prove itself through violence or cruelty. "I want Luz to grow up believing she's a blessing instead of a curse. I want her to see herself the way you and your grandmother see her. If marriage to you gives her that future, then perhaps we should discuss it."
The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later, as the first snow of winter began to dust the mountain peaks surrounding the camp. Maria had expected something foreign and frightening, but instead found herself part of a celebration that felt both ancient and surprisingly familiar. Women from the tribe had spent hours preparing her, braiding her hair with silver ornaments and dressing her in a beautiful deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the firelight like scattered stars. "You are nervous," observed Ayana, a young Apache woman who had become Maria's gentle guide through the customs and expectations of her new life. "This is natural, but Naalnish is a good man. He will be kind to you and the baby." Kind. Such a simple word, yet it encompassed everything Maria had lost and everything she dared hope for. Kindness had been absent from her life for so long that even the possibility of it felt like a miracle. The ceremony itself was unlike anything Maria had ever witnessed. There were no priests, no church, no solemn vows spoken in Latin. Instead, Naalnish came to her wearing traditional Apache clothing, a beautifully decorated shirt and leggings, his long hair adorned with eagle feathers that marked his status as a war chief. He carried a blanket woven from the finest wool, dyed in patterns that told the story of his lineage and achievements. Shijé stood before them, speaking in Apache, while the entire tribe gathered in a circle around them. The words were incomprehensible to Maria, but their rhythm and cadence felt like music, like poetry spoken to the accompaniment of drums and flutes. When the old woman gestured for them to join hands, Maria felt the calloused warmth of Naalnish's palm against hers and realized her trembling had stopped. "The ceremony speaks of two becoming one," Ayana whispered, translating quietly, "of separate streams joining to become a river, of winter snow melting to feed spring flowers." The metaphors were beautiful, but what struck Maria most was the way Naalnish looked at her during the ceremony, not with the dutiful resignation she had expected, but with something approaching wonder. When Shijé wrapped them both in the ceremonial blanket, binding them together in the eyes of the spirits and the tribe, his dark eyes never left her face. "You are beautiful," he said quietly. His words meant for her alone. The simple compliment hit Maria like a physical blow. When had anyone last called her beautiful? Not since before Luz was born, certainly. Not since Diego had looked at her with desire instead of disgust. She felt tears threaten and blink them back, unwilling to cry during what should be a moment of joy. The celebration continued long into the night, with feasting, dancing, and storytelling around the great fire. Maria found herself swept into conversations she could barely follow, welcomed by women who seemed genuinely pleased to have a new sister among them. They admired Luz without reservation, passing the baby from hand to hand and exclaiming over her unusual features as if they were rare gifts rather than marks of shame. "She will be a powerful medicine woman," predicted an elderly Apache woman, gently touching Luz's pale hair. "The spirits speak to those who carry their marks so clearly." "Or a great leader," suggested another. "See how calm she is among strangers? She has no fear because she knows she belongs everywhere." Their words painted a future for Luz that Maria had never dared imagine, one where her daughter's difference would be celebrated rather than hidden, where she might grow up to become someone important and respected rather than tolerated. The possibility was almost too wonderful to believe. As the evening wore on, Maria found herself watching Naalnish as he moved through the celebration. He spoke with his warriors about hunting plans and defense strategies, listened patiently to disputes that needed resolving, and checked on elderly tribe members to ensure they had what they needed for the coming winter. She began to understand the weight of responsibility he carried, not just for military leadership, but for the welfare of every person in the camp. "He is thinking always of others," Ayana observed, following Maria's gaze. "Sometimes I think he forgets that he also deserves happiness." The comment made Maria wonder what kind of happiness Naalnish might have sacrificed for duty. Had there been an Apache woman he'd wanted to marry? Dreams he had abandoned for the sake of his people? The thought that her arrival might have cost him something precious sat uneasily in her stomach.
When the formal celebration finally began to wind down, Naalnish appeared at her side with quiet courtesy. "Come," he said gently, "I will show you to our lodge." Our lodge. The words carried implications that made Maria's pulse quicken. She was now a married woman, wed to a man she barely knew, expected to share his bed and perhaps bear his children. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The lodge Naalnish led her to was larger than most, befitting his status as chief, but simply furnished with sleeping furs, storage baskets, and a small fire pit. He had clearly made an effort to prepare it for her arrival. Fresh pine boughs covered the floor, filling the space with their clean scent, and there were women's items laid out that must have been gifts from the other wives in the tribe. "You do not have to be afraid," Naalnish said quietly, seeming to sense her nervousness. "I will not. I know this marriage is strange for you. We can take time to know each other." His consideration surprised her. Most men, she imagined, would consider marriage rights to include immediate access to their wife's body. That he was offering patience, space to adjust, spoke to the character Shizia had promised. "Thank you," Maria said, settling Luz in a small basket lined with soft furs. This is all very new." "For me as well," he admitted, and something in his voice made her look at him more closely. "You've never been married?" "No, I was to be wed once, before I became chief, but she died in a cavalry raid 3 years ago." The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. "Since then, I have been too busy keeping my people alive to think of taking a wife." The revelation explained much about his careful distance, his focus on duty over personal desire. He had loved someone once, lost her to the violence that seemed to follow the Apache wherever they went. Now he was married to a Mexican woman because spirits and dreams demanded it, not because his heart had chosen. "I'm sorry," Maria said softly, "for your loss and for not being the wife you would have chosen." Naalnish was quiet for a long moment. staring into the small fire that cast dancing shadows on the lodge walls. When he finally spoke, his words surprised her. The woman I was to marry, her name was Desba. She was beautiful, brave, everything an Apache wife should be, but she was also conventional, safe. She would have given me the life I expected to live. He turned to look at Maria, his dark eyes reflecting firelight. You represent something I never thought possible. Change. Hope for a future different from the past. I don't know how to be that person, Maria said honestly. I don't know how to be a bridge between worlds. I'm just trying to keep my daughter safe. Perhaps that is exactly what makes you the right person, Naalnish suggested. The spirits rarely choose those who think they are ready for their calling. As if summoned by their conversation, Luz stirred in her basket and made soft waking sounds. Maria moved to comfort her, but Naalnish was already there, lifting the baby with a gentleness that made Maria's heart clench. Luz settled immediately in his arms, her pale eyes focusing on his face with that disconcerting intensity. "She trusts you," Maria observed. "Children and animals know who is safe. They see what adults learn to hide." Watching this powerful warrior chief tenderly caring for her daughter, Maria felt something shift in her chest. Not love, it was too soon for that, but the beginning of something that might become love, given time and nurturing. Perhaps their marriage, born of dreams and necessity, might grow into something real and meaningful. "What happens now? With the tribe, with the future you dreamed about?" Naalnish settled beside her on the sleeping furs, still holding Luz. He said, "Now we live. We raise your daughter, our daughter, to be strong and proud of what she represents. We show both our peoples that love is stronger than fear, that understanding is possible even across great differences. And if we fail, if the dreams were wrong, then at least we will have tried, and Luz will have grown up knowing she was cherished, not cursed." He looked down at the baby in his arms, his expression soft. "That alone makes everything worthwhile." Outside their lodge, the sounds of the celebration were finally fading as the tribe settled for the night. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the camp in pristine white that muffled sound and softened the harsh edges of the mountain landscape. Inside the warm circle of firelight, 3 people who had been strangers that morning were learning to become a family. Maria watched Naalnish singing softly to Luz in Apache, his deep voice weaving around words she didn't understand but somehow felt in her bones. Her daughter's eyes were drifting closed, her tiny fist curled around one of his fingers with complete trust. "She's never been that calm with anyone else," she said wonderingly. "Because she knows," Naalnish replied. "She knows she is finally where she belongs." As the fire settled into glowing embers and Luz fell asleep to the sound of Apache lullabies, Maria allowed herself to believe, for the first time since her daughter was born, that the future might hold joy instead of just survival. The pale child who had been called cursed was already bringing together 2 hearts, 2 worlds, 2 peoples who had forgotten how to trust. Perhaps the spirits did know what they were doing, after all.